Okay, a couple of weeks ago, we had this brief telephone call between Don Roth and me, and he has a completely different approach, a different viewpoint on certain aspects of Book of Revelation, especially 1260 days and 42 months and time times and half a time. Revelation is such a book, it is very open-ended and it should be kept open-ended. And I thought all of us would benefit from uh, Don Roth's approach. It's a different approach and than mine. So it helps us to broaden our thinking and educate ourselves with different approaches and different views on the same set of scriptures. So Don Roth volunteered to give us a presentation on his viewpoint on these timelines, 1260 days and 42 months and time times and half a time. And in Book of Daniel, there is 1290 days and 1335 days. So I would hand over the control to Don Roth. Before that, any volunteers for prayer?
Thank you. This is a great opportunity to be able to speak to everyone about this because, as Tagore mentioned, my take, of course, is more in the line of time. The whole book, the whole Bible, basically, if you spend any time thinking about it, is a book that tracks time, starting with creation. And so it's important for us to be able, I think, to be able to understand these different times and how they affect us. And so we'll start our study in the book of Revelation, chapter 12. This is kind of an interesting approach that I'm going to take. As you will see, we'll start with the first verse right here. Now, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a garland of 12 stars. This is a really, we jump, the interesting thing is we jump right into this description. And so my thinking on this was that, is there someplace else that we can see this description? And there is, actually. It might not recognize this, but if we go all the way back to the book of Genesis, and we're going to look into the book of Genesis here, Genesis chapter 37, and we're going to read a description that is very similar to the one that we read in the book of Revelation, Revelation 12. Another interesting thing about this is that if most of you, I think, were on for the Friday evening Bible study, and Tagore made a very interesting statement during the conversation that followed the presentation, and it's something that I really didn't recognize. I mean, I was, as far as I was concerned, this was kind of new information, and which is, you never know when things are going to come along and change. And so he pointed out the second brides, and so this is really a surprise in a way. So we're going to read in chapter 37 something rather interesting. We can start in verse 8. It's Joseph having dreams. And this is a particular dream he had that's important to us for this discussion. And the brothers said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. This final dream is really an interesting dream. And then he dreamed still another dream, and he told it to his brothers and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars bowed down to me." So he told it to his father and his brothers. And his father rebuked him, and he said to him, "What is this that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come and bow down to the earth before you?" And this didn't go over well with brothers. And actually, you could see that it kind of irritated the father. The interesting thing here is he said, and he made an important inference here, and that is he's talking to Joseph, and he said, "Your mother." Well, Rebecca was his mother, and of course she was the second bride, or the second wife. And it's kind of an interesting thing, and it's really got me to start thinking about this, because actually what Leah did was she stepped in front of Rebecca, who should have been the bride of Jacob. And so we see this. Now, the other thing is, we see this picture, it doesn't have 12 stars, it has 11. Well, that's because Joseph dreamed the dream, and he is one of the stars. So there was only 11 that he could see, because he was looking at it. So he only could see 11, it's really quite, I think that's an important little fact that we should be aware of. And so when I looked at this, I said, this is really interesting, because what this is telling us indirectly, it is saying, look, Rebecca, Jacob, and Joseph's brothers are all going to be in that first resurrection. That should be pretty clear. And so when we think in these terms, now we're thinking about the woman, right? And if we go back, we can return back again to, you should keep your place in Revelation 12, because we'll be going back to Revelation 12 quite regularly. And so if we're looking at this, we're saying, we're talking about this woman clothed with the sun, moon, and stars at her feet, and who is this woman that's being described here? Well, that woman being described doesn't really, when does this woman come into existence? It comes into existence in Exodus chapter 12, when Moses takes the children of Israel to the mountain, and then a kind of an agreement. The Israelites agree to follow the precepts and the laws, etc., that God is going to lay down at this time at the mountain. And so as we look at this, the woman now, if we understand this properly, the woman is Israel. And so what we're seeing here is we're going from the first chapters the creation chapters of the book of Genesis. We're jumping all the way to the Exodus, when the woman becomes a reality. Up until that point in time, it wasn't the reality. Even though Joseph dreamed about it, it still wasn't a reality. It didn't become a reality until you had the acceptance of the two group of Israel, and the acceptance of God accepting Israel as a wife. This is now we're coming to another really interesting point of view here. Well, first of all, the first thing we need to recognize is this amount of time from creation to the Exodus is 2,549 years. So we have just jumped in the book of Revelation from the creation to the Exodus. More than 2,500 years. Now, if you think about this, you may not have thought about it, but this is basically what is taking place. So now, let's continue to read and see what we find. And the woman was clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and she had a garland of 12 stars. Then, being with child, she cried out in labor and in pain to give birth. So what have we done now? We've gone from the book of Exodus, and we've jumped all the way over to the birth of Jesus Christ. So now, what have we done? We have another chunk of time is obviously inserted here. So now you have another 1,500 years. First you had 2,500 years, then you got 1,500 years. And so then when we're looking at this, the natural, for me, the natural thing to realize is this book really jumps when it comes to time. We aren't reading one thing followed by another thing, followed by another thing, followed by another thing. We see here a big jump in time. Now, we'll pick up the story here. We talked about her being with child. And then, let's see. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. And his tail drew a third part of the stars from heaven and threw them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. Now, this act that we find where Satan or the dragon is going to take a third of the angels, we should recognize this as Isaiah chapter 14. And I'm taking it for granted that all of you recognize or understand Isaiah chapter 14. So if in the discussion, if there is some question about that, we can take a look at it in more detail. But for what we're looking at here right now, we're just going to take it as something that had taken place prior to the point where Satan is going to try to destroy the child that this woman bears. So this is what we're looking at. And so continues on, and she bore a male child who was to rule the nations with a rod of iron. Her child was caught up to God and his throne. So AD, that would be AD 30. So that's another thing that you can investigate, but it's as far as calendarically concerned, this is the year of the crucifixion. Now, we can see that this is all compacted into that time where the woman has the child. The child is threatened by Satan, and of course we know the stories involved in this. And then it talks about the child was caught up to God and his throne. So, well, we understand this. It's really quite clear. Probably what you may not really understand is that the Old Testament that we look at, we say, well, we get to the Old Testament, and then the New Testament starts, and we have all the Gospels, and that's the New Testament. That's the start of the New Testament. Well, if you think about this, it really isn't the start of the New Testament. The New Testament doesn't start until the wave sheaf offering, John 20, when Mary, the example or the picture is Mary was there, and she was kind of clinging to Christ, who was resurrected, and he told her, he said, look, I've got to go to my Father, your Father, my God, and your God. And so this is the acceptance, the official acceptance of the wave sheaf offering. And so it wasn't until that wave sheaf offering was accepted by the Father that we actually have a change. We have a change from the Old Testament to the New Testament. And so as a result of this, we now have another period of time that we are going to be looking at. So as we go ahead with this, continue to read here in verse 7, and war broke out in heaven, and Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was there a place found for them any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast with him. Then I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ, and the power of his Christ have come, for the accuser of the brethren, who accused them before God day and night, has been cast down. And so now we're actually ready to look at this final gap of time. So in other words, what we have is the time element from the point that Christ was crucified and accepted as the wave sheaf offering by the Father. And this now is the New Testament church. This is the New Testament. The New Testament of those who, I use that word church, and it's not a good word to use, but continuing, what I'd like you to do is think about this just a bit here, right? And if he's accusing the brethren until he was cast out, that means we're the brethren. That means he's accusing us right now. And this is the way it is. Think about the book of Job. Satan comes along, and what is he, well, this guy is, you kept a fence around him, you protected him. And this is why he's got every reason to believe in you, because look at way you've treated him. And so when we think we're thinking in these terms, we can understand that this is exactly the same thing that is going on right now. He is at the throne, he's up in heaven, and what is he doing? He's bad-mouthing us, or pointing out, the things that we don't do right. Well, look at this guy. Look what he did. And you are going to call him your son? This is the way that we have to look at this. This is not something that has already happened. This is something that is going to happen. And when is it going to happen? Well, we know that this is a point in time, just like we saw. We had a big jump, 2 big jumps, and now this is the 3rd big jump that we're having. And so as a result of this, we can say, and this points to the fact that what we're talking about here is a point very close to the resurrection. And so there's okay, there is, we're going to go back to verse 6 because it's important, verse 6, because verse 6 makes an important connection for us. And it says, then the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared by God that they should feed her 1,260 days. So this is a specific amount of time. Now, is it years? Can we say that it's years? Now, I don't think we can say that it's years. I think that we have to, it's called days. And we also see a reference just in chapter 11, where we find the same number of days spelled out for us in chapter 11. And in verse 3, it says, and I gave power to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy 1,260 days clothed in sackcloth. Now, originally, I'm thinking, these two time periods are exactly the same. But the reality is they are not exactly the same. But they represent a certain time element that is very, very similar, because I'm saying 2,260 days, it's the resurrection. We can look at this and in other scriptures, which we will be doing, but for this reference, you can see the two are very, very close to each other. But there's a little time element in that has to be applied to the 2 witnesses in chapter 11. Slightly a slight difference. And so now that we looked at this, which is something I think it's important for us to recognize, that we do have the adversary. He is up there, and he is pointing out our faults, correctly or incorrectly. He wants to make us look bad, basically, to the Father. Now, I would like to go to number 4. Yes, we'd like to go to Daniel chapter 12. And this is, of course, where we see an important piece of time that's different than the 1260 days, but it's an important piece of time. And if we read that, it's in verse 11. It says, and from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination of desolation is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Blessed is he who waits and comes to the 1,335 days. Now, obviously, this is we're talking about days. We're not talking about years here. Now, the reason that I say this is because when we go back to chapter 9 of Daniel, we see in the prophecies of in his prophecy that he's talking about days here. So why is it that I'm saying that the 1,230 or 1,335 days are in fact days in this book in chapter 12, but in chapter 9 he talks about days, the same, only they're a longer number of days, but he still calls them days, but there's a difference. And so how do we know that the Daniel 9 verses are dealing in years and not days? Because of the very first a couple verses of chapter 9, and that explains to us what he's talking about is years. And that critical verse in chapter 9 is in chapter 2, in the first year of the reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the number of years specified by the word of God through Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in desolation of Jerusalem. And so the scripture tells us that this is what he's talking about, because he's dealing with what? The rebuilding of the second temple, but primarily the rebuilding of Jerusalem. If you read the scripture in 9, it doesn't talk about necessarily about the temple, but it is talking about completing the wall around Jerusalem. And that is what, those are the defining days that you need to look at if you're going to really understand the scripture or the prophecy of Daniel 9. And I've written an article on it. You could look it up under biblicalcalendarproof.com. And it is the Solomon's temple, or the destruction of Solomon's temple is the subject. And so now if we can go back to looking at this 1,335 days. Blessed. See, blessed is the one who comes to 1,335 days. What does that mean? That means that he's going to be alive at that 1,335th day. He's going to be there. He's going to be there at the start, and he's going to be there at the finish. Because it says, blessed is he who comes. If he comes to that time, hey, he's going to be alive. So this sets him apart, doesn't it? So if thinking about this, this is a very special time. And so what is it? How should we be looking at this time period? Well, it is connected to what we're going to look at in back in Revelation. So let's go back to 16 or 12, chapter 12 of Revelation, and continue to take a look at what the Bible has to say about this time period. And so and they, picking it up in verse 12, therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time. So it's pretty much all over for him at this point in time. But it always makes me think of Satan is going back to the book of Genesis. And we think that, well, this guy, he sneaked into the Garden of Eden when God wasn't looking. This is absolutely not true. First of all, he, as Job tells us, he can't do anything without permission from God. And in this particular case, he had to have permission to go into the garden. He just didn't, sneak in there and try to upset little old Eve. No. And if you think about him and himself, I mean, he had three options available. He could have done nothing, right? That's very unlikely. Or he could have said to Eve, and look, this guy is really powerful. You better follow everything that he tells you. But he took the approach of trying to kind of wreck the creation here, which he did. But this is just a kind of an aside, and the way we should be thinking about what we're reading when we read the Bible. So we're going to continue on. Now, when the dragon saw that he had been cast to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the child, but the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for times, and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Now, okay, what should we gather by what we just saw here, what we just read? Let me remind you of where the woman came into existence. That woman that we see as represented by the 12 tribes of Israel, right? And we already talked about this. And so when we see this reference here, what is this reference pointing us back to? Well, it's pointing us back to the book of to the story, book of Exodus, really. He makes the exact same statement in the book of Exodus. He says, well, let me see. Oh, yes, let's see. It's Exodus 19. If we go to Exodus 19, Exodus 19, and we're going to read verse 4. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. We have to make this connection. First of all, we made the connection of Israel accepting this marriage arrangement with God, with Christ, actually, and as a result of this marriage arrangement, he's making this he's telling him what they did. Now, when you read this, this is a picture, just like the book of Revelation is not. It's not what basically what I've been explaining. It's not what if you just read the book, Revelation chapter 12, you wouldn't necessarily understand these things. But this second wife thing, it comes to play again. Christ is crucified and is killed, isn't he? That ends the marriage relationship with Israel. Okay? And so now we have a second wife. It's the second wife isn't there yet, but she's the exact word, betrothed. She's betrothed, which basically in the old ways of thinking, I mean, when people arranged their marriages, once the wife agreed, this is the other thing, the wife agreed to marry this guy, well, okay, until the marriage actually takes place, she's still considered his wife, even though it hasn't formally happened. So this is another really interesting thing. And I had never thought of this until Tagore pointed this out last Sabbath. And it's like, wow, this is an important piece of information that we should have. We should remember this because it really applies. It applies to us. We are going to be the second wife. Okay, well, we're going to do better than the first one. That's for sure. So, when we see this connection here in Exodus chapter 19, we see the same connection. You can't miss the fact that what we're doing is we're looking at in picture, basically a very similar situation. And so let's go back to our Revelation 16 and pick up the story, or Revelation 12, pardon me, not 16. That don't go there. We got the wrong one. But when I got to this point here, the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle that she might fly into the wilderness to her place of safety, where she is nourished for times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. Now, for me, when I look at this, I say, what was the Exodus like? How did the Exodus come about? Well, God got 2 people, and actually, we look at Moses and Aaron. God, Moses and Aaron. We look at those 2 men as giants, right? But what you have to understand is when they came on the scene, they were pretty much nobodies. In fact, this guy had to have them do some miracles and things like this in order convince the people, then maybe these guys are for real. Okay. So what I'm saying here is, who led Israel out? That was Moses and Aaron. They led them out. And so these people, as we are looking at this, they're going to be led out of from wherever they were. They're going to be led to this place where they have security, where they are fed for 1,260 days. But you see, they haven't gotten to this 1,260 days yet. They haven't gotten to the place of in effect safety, because we can see here he said he's going to give them two wings of an eagle. So this reference takes us back to the Exodus, which we should use. When I read this is what I'm thinking, because we see how chapter 12 is all about looking at the woman, the first woman and then the second woman. And the first woman was carried away on eagle's wings. Well, not really. Well, you read that and you wonder about it. Now, there's a lot of people that don't believe that Israel could travel from Egypt all the way to the Red Sea in the number of days that they traveled. And when you look at this, there was a Sabbath, and they camped on the Sabbath. They didn't travel, but they did travel on Friday. So they had one day of travel, and they didn't travel on the Sabbath. And then they started out traveling on the first day of the week. And so they traveled the first day of the week, second day of the week, third day of the week, until they got to Wednesday. But if you think about this, there's a scripture in there that tells us, well, they traveled night and day. So for those days, they never slept. That's a miracle. That's kind of being carried on eagle's wings. And we see that no matter what their condition was previous, that God healed them so that they could walk, they could travel. And they traveled night and day, the day after day. And so therefore, if you think in those terms, you can see that they would be capable of traveling that distance. Now, there's one more little thing that I think personally is the way it worked, because I think that God made the land, in a sense, rising on the backside of their traveling so that they would be going downhill during that. Now, this is just I'm just thinking this. I don't want you to, there's nothing in the Bible that says this, but I'm just thinking if God was in fact making a way for them to be able to travel that big distance and to be able to do it physically, this would be, to me, being carried on eagle's wings, but that's only my idea. So anyway, as we look at this, we see that Revelation chapter 12 really has all, from the very beginning, I have showed you that they were connected to the Exodus. And for the Exodus, they had two people leading them, right? And so if we apply the same thinking to the people that 1,335-day group of people that are blessed. We don't know how many. This is what it is. This is this plain, simple statement. There is the way I look at this, and again, it's the way I look at it. I look at it as this. When he said blessed, I'm thinking, what is the great blessing that we're all kind of would like to be there, and that is for the resurrection, right? We'd all like to be there for that. Now, when I was a lot younger, Mr. Armstrong, of course, he did the same thing. He was looking for this, for the resurrection. He wanted to be there, but it wasn't in the time element. But after that had happened, I thought, well, I'm pretty young. I could be there. It'd be nice. But now, of course, I'm taking another view. I'm, as everyone knows, I'm quite old, so probably I'm not going to be there. But and so in my own mind, it's, well, okay, so it really doesn't matter. I'll die, I'll come up in a resurrection. That's it. So once we look at this, this is an important little piece of information that God has given us about moving the people to this place of safety. Now you have the 1,335 days, and so this is counting the starting time. That's obviously there has to be a starting time. And so when you're looking at it, this is the starting time, because again, in this particular case, it's talking about days again, not years. And so when we see this, to me, it makes perfect sense. And the sense is that if we have been looking at the Exodus right along, these references are powerful references to the Exodus, then the same picture should apply. In other words, there would be two individuals who would be leading this group. Now, in the practical sense, everybody is, there are groups out there. Oh, we're training the two witnesses and all, all these foolish, what I call foolish statements, because no one knows. And I suspect not even the two men that are going to be doing, they have the foggiest idea that this is what they're going to be doing. But this is, in fact, a great reference that this group is going to be led to this 1,260 days. Now, they haven't gotten there clearly. As far as I could see, they haven't gotten there. Now, so now we have to look and see what else is taking place here, because there's more important pieces of information that we have to recognize. And so when we go here, the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to a place where she is nourished for times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So the serpent spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. Okay. Now, this again
3
we're
months.
dealing, in the wilderness, you're going to have a flood. I mean, it doesn't say that you're going to be crossing the Red Sea again. It just says they're out in the wilderness, and there's going to be this big flood. Well, the flood is just a picture of an army. Satan is sending an army to destroy the woman. This is what he's doing. He's sending this army, and there is something to think about here too about this. But whoever group constitutes this woman is actually going to be protected. And verse 15, so the serpent spewed water out of his mouth, sent an army like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. So, in other words, destroyed by the army. And so what happens? But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. This is just in a sense, is the opposite of what took place when they were crossing the Red Sea. And so, but we can see that this is really a very important piece of information. And so, but what it says, if we back up here, it says, but the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness to her place of safety, where she's nourished for times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So when you're reading that, Satan is already gone. Now, it's a little bit, you can't read it verse after verse after verse and think in those terms. You have to think in terms of, what did this verse say? And what it says is times and half a time. They had no worry that Satan, he was out of the picture. When did he go out of the picture? When his army was destroyed. So that, you see, comes in the verse after this. But actually, what it's really telling us is that, because if this were true, then the army would not be a threat. And so, because the army is a threat, this has to take place prior. In other words, the army had to be prior, and the flood had to be prior to this time element of time and half a time. Now, this is kind of where you need to understand the calendar. See, this is one of the basic reasons why no one, and when I say that, I'm not saying in an absolute sense, but basically in general, no one really understands what is being talked about here in the book of Revelation, because they don't understand how God keeps time. This is an important function. If you don't understand how God keeps time, and you reference everything here according to the Gregorian calendar, or you make up a calendar, then that all flies out the window. You can't understand this. What calendar did John have when he lived? The Gregorian calendar wasn't even thought about when he lived. He used the Hebrew calendar, and the Hebrew calendar is based on something entirely different than the Gregorian calendar. And so when you're looking at times, what you're saying, oh, yeah, this is 3.5 years, what we're talking about here, 3.5 years. And so when you understand the time element here, that time element is less than 1,335 days, but it's more than 1,260 days. But you don't know. And this is the reason why it's put in these terms, because if God spelled it out, now you would have an opportunity to tell, well, this is when God is going to send his son back to this earth. But because he puts it in these terms, there's no way that you can tell. The reason is because every year or every 3 years has a big variable in the number of days involved there. Because in every 3 years, you'll have at least one 13-month year. And, or depending, see, you can't even depend on that, because there are a few times when you will have two 13-month years in a 3-year period. But the totals, you can figure them out, and you will see that they are greater than the number of days of 1,260 days. They are greater. And what it's simply saying here is, at this point in time, Satan is gone. He's out of the picture. So they're free from his threat. So they're in safety from that point on, 3.5 years. People tried to put 3.5 years into the 1260. That is not the way it works. The 1,260 is a separate set of days. And so now we can, and because of the terminology here, we cannot put a finger on exactly when this happens. You can make all kinds of guesses, but that's all they are, is guesses, because you don't know which 3.5 years we're talking about here. Now, if you knew that, well, then you could put your finger right on the date. So this is an important concept that you have to recognize. And so at this point is when Satan is gone and they're free. Now, if we make this comparison between the Exodus and the fact that there were two people that led them out of the Exodus, we now know, when we go back to chapter 11, that we're talking about two witnesses. Where did those two witnesses come from? My way of thinking is they were the two that would obviously have had to be leading those people into a place of safety. But at some point in time, they leave the people of safety and they go someplace else. They go in, this is where we're looking at, because see, chapter 11 actually follows chapter 12 in time elements. If you look at it in that way, the way it should be looked at. Now, why do I say this? Because we're looking at the resurrection, right? And we know that this group, because of the statement it's made, 1,260 days, that at the end of 1,260 days, they're going to be resurrected. And we see that the two witnesses are going to be prophesying 1,260 days, but they are not going to be resurrected when they die. It's 3.5 days later that they're resurrected. So so now if we look at chapter 11 and we look at Now after 11:11. Now after 3.5 days, the breath of life from God entered them, and they stood on their feet, and great fear fell on those who saw them. And they heard a loud voice from heaven saying to them, "Come up here." And they ascended to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies saw them. Now, that word, that what it says, a loud voice, is exactly the same word that we find in Thessalonians when it talks about the trump of God and the voice of the archangel, etc. Wow. That's the same word that's being used here. So this, in fact, is the same time element. And so when you look at the 1,260 days, that's the same time element, but you have the 3.5 day arrangement here. Now, so that you should be able to see this connection and how this really all comes together. So as we are looking at this, we need to go back to chapter 12 and continue to read in chapter 12, because this is another piece of the puzzle that I think is a very interesting piece to be put into place. We see in verse 16, the earth opened up its mouth and swallowed up the flood that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. And the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went to make war with the rest of her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. In the past years, and I have a few years under my belt, whenever I would read this, I would think, that's me. I keep the commandments. I have the testimony of Christ. Wow. Does this mean what I'm reading here? Yes. This what it's talking about, he's going after the rest. You mean there's another group? There's more than one group. Obviously, there's two groups, isn't there? So he's going after the other group. And so as a result of that, it would be kind of interesting if we knew what the other group, in fact, is. It's vitally important for us to understand what's going on in both of these cases, because we are going to fit into one or the other. We're either going to be the second group that Satan goes after, or we're going to be in the first, who is in a place of safety. There's a lot of other things that we can bring out by reading carefully through there about what is taking place while they're spending that 1,260 days there in safety. So let's take a look at I think this should be it. No, that's not what I want. Verse 6. Marker 6. Marker 6. Well, where we want to go is to the book of Matthew, and we're going to go to chapter 25 of the book of Matthew, and we'll read chapter 25, or just go through part of it at least, and get the idea of who is it that Satan is going to come back to. And so then the kingdom, starting in verse 1, then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to a virgin who took her lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise, and 5 were foolish, moronic, the term is. And so we see this. And those who were foolish took their lamps, but took no oil in them. Now, what is the lamp? Well, the lamp is basically the understanding of what God is accomplishing here on this creation here, and they understand this, and so that means, well, they keep the commandments and they have the testimony of Jesus Christ. They understand it, but they took no oil. What does the oil represent? The oil represents faith. They have to have a faith element. And so when we're reading this, those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels. It took oil in their vessels with their lamps. So, in other words, they had a separate container of oil. Well, okay. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they slumbered and slept. And at midnight, a cry was heard, "Behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out to meet him." Then all the virgins arose, trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." And so what is this really telling us? Can you give your faith to someone else? This is what the oil represented. And so you might think, well, they could, if you're looking at it in the literal, well, they could have given them some oil. No, they can't give them any oil. It's not possible. You can't give your faith to someone else. This is what we're really looking at when we look at this parable here. And all the virgins arose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, saying, "No, lest there should be not enough for us and you, but go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves." It's a little late, because what is it? Are the shops open? Literally, that's really what the picture is that it's giving you. You see, it isn't the true picture isn't that they are running out of oil, and no, the true picture is it's a question of faith. What they believed, they had the right beliefs, but they didn't have the substance. You see, when you're looking, if you go back to the book of Hebrews in chapter 11, it says, faith is the substance. That means the factual understanding, the understanding of the facts. It's a factual thing. It's not, well, I believe, yeah, right. I believe that, there's all kinds of people that believe, but that is not faith. Faith is based on reality. And so when you understand this, you look at chapter 25, and well, let's continue to read here, because this is really an important chapter for all of us, including myself, for all of us to understand quite clearly. So, but the wise answered and said to them, they should go buy oil, and then continuing on. And while they went out to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. Afterward, the virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered and said to them, "Surely I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you do not know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. And so when you're looking at this, we can go back in the book of Matthew to the statement that Christ had made when they said, look at all the wonderful things, the magazines and all the whatever we've been doing here to promote Christianity, etc., etc. And he says, I don't know you. Why? Because they were lawless. That's basically what is being said here. And so the important part of this, the important understanding that we should be taking from Revelation 12 and Revelation 11 and Daniel and Matthew 25 here is the fact that, if we find ourselves in this second group, we realize there is no way for us to survive without losing our life, really. This is basically what's taking place. If you think about the understanding of what is coming, and we see this coming, that we are not going to buy or be able to buy or sell. In other words, we're going to have a strong possibility we're going to be starving, or whatever the situation is. And I don't know how we're going to be in detail getting through this, but basically, this is what we're looking at. You either take the mark or you starve to death. And so five of these virgins, they think to themselves, deceived, because what they're thinking, and their thinking is based on not having the faith, not having the structure, not having the total understanding and believing, then God wouldn't want us to suffer. He wouldn't want us to starve. So it's okay if we take the mark. It'll work out. He'll look past this problem. No, he isn't going to look past the problem. And so what we have to realize is that if we're in that group, in this Matthew group, if I'm in this Matthew group, which there's nothing that says I can be any place else, or maybe I could be 6 foot under. That's another possibility, of course. But I've thought this through, and I know that what is required of me if I find myself in this place. Now, everyone has to face death. It's clear that the first group in place of safety, they didn't physically die, but for all practical purposes, when you see that army coming, tanks and everything else, whatever they have, which is a lot, hey, we're as good as dead. That's basically the way that they would think. But they think, well, if this is the end, if God is going to have the end here, well, wait, we're standing. Stand still. You go back to the book of Exodus. Moses says, stand still and see the salvation. And this is basically what they do. So as far as they're concerned, they're as good as dead, and we're not moving. We're just, whatever the end is, the end is. And so therefore they face death. Literally, the second group must also not just face death, but actually be committed to die unequivocally. So this is I think is one of the reasons why I felt so strongly about opening up what I understand from these verses. So at this time, we can take questions. If anyone has any questions about this material, you're free to ask them.
Thank you very much for your presentation, for your unique insight into these verses, and taking time to help us and present this. And I see honesty and sincerity in your approach, in your unique insight. I really appreciate you coming tonight and helping us with a different perspective altogether. And we will open the room for the questions and comments to Mr. Don Roth. I have a question.
Okay.
If we fall into second group, what do you see the scenario for us?
Well,
Like, we did not make it into place of safety, and what is the best thing that we can do?
we know, as far as I'm concerned, if I find myself there, I know that I have to die. I mean, I have that this is what's going to happen. See, if you go back to the statement that Christ made, if you try to preserve your life, you're really going to lose it. And see, there's half of well, you don't know. I mean, it's that it's exactly half, but there's a percentage or a group that is going to try to preserve their life through this difficult time. And so they're going to do it by now, if you have some way to preserve your life without knuckling under to the beast power, well, okay. And bowing down to a false god, well, I guess, but I don't think it's possible. I think you either knuckle under and you live, or you don't knuckle under and you end up being, they kill you or you die one way or the other. They have lots of ways of doing it. The important thing for us to know is that if we end up there, we know what we have to do. This is what it is. And if we do that, we will be in the resurrection.
So the people in second group, do they know that others, first group has already gone to place of safety?
Yes, there is a group. And when I look at this, we see, I'm now, this is what I'm thinking. And this is it's not printed here in the book. But the group that doesn't go to the place of safety, when they see, and this is not something that's being done in a corner. This is something that is made. It's something that would, if you thought about it, would be on the evening news. We got these crazy people. They're all fleeing. They're fleeing. And, oh, look at there's an army going after them. Oh, I'm glad I didn't go in that group. And so this is a way, I mean, I don't know that that's actually going to happen, but knowing human nature, this is basically what the end result would be. And so how this all comes about, I have no idea. And all I know is, look, this is what it says. Here's what it says. Here's the end result. Be prepared. That's basically, and you have to go back to 11. I mean, 1 Corinthians 11. Your responsibility is not through some minister. Your responsibility is directly to Christ. That is you. This is, and Paul tells us we must stand. What does that mean? We must stand as individuals. Doesn't matter if you're in this group with this group or that group. Doesn't matter, because you have to have the relationship to Christ yourself, your personal. What's your personal relationship? And basically, what you've been saying and what I've been saying and trying to teach is this very correct understanding that, look, it's what we do, it's what we believe as an individual that counts.
Any other comments, questions?
Do you all see the relationship of 12, Revelation 12, to the woman? Oh, by the way, I want to thank you for giving me that insight about the second woman. The second woman, we see it right here. I mean, this is the second woman. We're going to become the second woman. It's not happened yet, of course, but the principle is perfect. Principle is perfect. And
We have John Holman.
Yeah.
Okay. On that last subject about the second group that's not in a place of safety in Matthew 25, if you want to go into it a little more, see it on Don Roth's webpage, calendarproof.net, or you can use .com or .org. We've got all three of them. The article about the 10 virgins for more detail on that subject.
I appreciate the opportunity, the fact that the Gore gave me the opportunity to speak on this, what I consider a very important subject, and you can see why I had talked to him about Revelation 12 and Revelation 11.
I have one more question.
Okay.
The 5 virgins, they were not able to share their oil
Right.
with others. And you mentioned oil is a type of faith. Can you throw more light on that?
Well, how can you see this? It isn't a matter that, look, it almost sounds like that when you read it, like they're kind of stingy. They got this oil, but they're not willing to give this oil up. Well, the oil isn't it's the picture. The oil pictures your faith. Where does your faith come from? Your faith comes from studying God's word and realizing that it is absolute truth. This book is in one of the important things that I think I have when I say this. I got to remember that God opens our mind. That's all. I if I think about all of the articles and everything that I've written, I understand that if God wasn't with me opening, when I'd be reading something and so that's what that means. I'd read it. For instance, the flood article. I had read that flood story to my kids. I don't know how many, that was their favorite piece of the Bible. Really tell us about the flood, again. It was, was reading it and reading it. And then comes along a time when it was important for me to understand something that I had read over time after time. In fact, most everybody reads right over it, but the fact is that the year of the flood was a 385-day year. And when I realized that, I was like, whoa, wait a minute here. I got a problem. A 385-day year. How did that happen? Well, that's when you go back into the Hebrew years, you find, that's and the interesting thing is that is the maximum length that you can have for a year, 385 days. And so, well, this is the way it all comes about. Everything, I'm reading this. I didn't realize that. That's what that means. Okay. So you start putting all those what it means together, and you get a tremendously important understanding of what this book is all about. And I believe that it is truth. There is no place else for us to get truth except for here. It tells who God is, it tells us who he is, it tells us what our future is, it tells us how to get to the future. It's all here. It just takes time to dig it out and make it a reality. And that's exactly what you said. Well, you gotta be studying, Well, I agree with that. That if you don't, it's not going to be there. You're not going to understand it.
Yeah, you're right. Faith comes from hearing word of God, and there's a time element. Like it takes years and decades for you to build faith based on knowledge, understanding, discernment, all these things, right?
Yep, right.
So the wise virgins cannot just give all their work to others momentarily. They have to go through that process themselves, right? The
Right.
foolish virgins.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
So they're incapable of giving, not that they are stingy.
You're right.
Okay. We have Stan raised. Go ahead, Stan.
Yeah, I have two questions. Would it be fair to say that the group of question number one, would it be fair to say that the group that makes it into the place of safety is the true church, and the second woman that does not make it into the place of safety is show church?
Well, part of it. You got to see those that are willing to lay down their life. They're part of the true church. I mean, that's what makes them part of the true church. When you said show church, that's a good term. And this is the show church is those that don't take any oil. They don't have any oil. And which means they don't have the faith to lay down their life. And see, the whole idea of this presentation is to add to your faith, because I'm adding to hopefully I've added to your knowledge. And so therefore, I've added to your knowledge of what the Bible is about. I have, in that process, I have been building your faith. This is basically whenever I make a presentation, and I have in the past made some presentations here, my whole point is to build those that are listening, build their faith, make this book a reality, make it a living reality to us. This is
Okay, thank you. Second question, the reason that the 5 wise virgins could not give their oil, could that be an illustration of Paul's statement, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling?
Oh, well, there it is. That's exactly right. That's correct. See, it's always, you're always dealing as an individual with God. And you can't, you can't, come in on someone else's coattails. This doesn't happen. So it's your, and that's a perfect example, what you just gave me. Perfect example. It's done over and over. I mean, you go back to the book of Ezekiel, and it talks about, well, now wait a minute, if this guy is really nasty, but he repents and changes his way, change his way, then he shall live, right? And the person who actually was following God's way, but then turned his back on it, he's headed for death. So the Old Testament, the example is always there, whether it's in the Old Testament or in the New Testament.
Okay, thank you.